It's the champ, Shannon the Cannon, two-time heavyweight champion of the world. And you're watching Sports Icons. Subscribe. Let's go, champ. Let's go, champ. Let's go, champ. Champ.
So I've been thinking a little bit about this exhibition fight between Mike Tyson and Roy Jones Jr. Now, this will be taking place on September the 12th in California. It will be pay-per-view. It will be an app for those of you who are interested in maybe watching this pay-per-view. All details on my official website, link in the description box as always. So this fight is going to be an 8-round exhibition, which means exhibition rules. So it's not quite what you will see on Sky Sports, BT Sport, Showtime, for example. With the professionals, there are certain restrictions. Okay, so go read up about those. Now, that doesn't mean that these guys are going to stick to it, but again, that depends on the referee. And I've got a feeling the referee, whoever he may be, may end up spoiling this fight, make it quite a boring fight. But we'll have to wait and see on that one. Now, when you look at both fighters, now Mike Tyson, even in his prime, he wasn't one of the big guys. He wasn't one of the big heavyweights. In fact, his size, being quite short, meant that he had to pack on a lot of muscle. So he had to come up to heavyweight. So packing on the muscle. And because of that, he could get down low, come in on his opponent's chest and just bob and weave. And it was difficult for his opponents to punch down and keep him off them. And him with the body shots, the uppercuts, the overhand rights, the left hooks. It was very, very difficult for the heavyweights to negate what it was that Mike Tyson was doing. And he was very, very successful for a long, long time. The baddest man on the planet. Unfortunately, the way that his career went, of course, with the prison sentence and everything, that derailed a lot of his momentum in that as well. But of course, even after them, there's nothing wrong with losing to a Evander Holyfield. Quite how he lost, that's probably more of a kick to Mike Tyson, with the fact that he was using dirty tactics, and it's almost like he wanted out of the fight with Evander Holyfield, so biting the ear and all that kind of thing. And then of course with Lennox Lewis, nothing wrong with losing to Lennox Lewis, nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But when you're losing to, say, a Brit and a Irish gatekeeper, especially like his last one with say, Kevin McBride. Again, a lot of that was down to motivation. Mike Tyson was just fighting for the money at that point, not glory or anything like that. Now, when he switched to Roy Jones Jr., at one time, pound for pound, number one for a long, long time. When Roy Jones Jr. was at his peak, he was untouchable. So even the other champions in and around his weight class at super middleweight and light heavyweight, for example, he was so much better than them. He made them look like amateurs at the best of times. But of course, when he took his first loss, again, that was a debatable loss. He then avenged it like a straight away and absolutely mauled the guy. But when he took that loss, he no longer had that undefeated record. So suddenly now he was starting to change, and you could see that he was starting to change. The motivation seemed to have been lost, shall we say, because he no longer had that undefeated record. Now, Roy Jones Jr., he's been in there with some of the best. He's been right the way up to heavyweight in that before, which is one of the things that I want to mention in this video, that I wouldn't be at all surprised if Mike Tyson and Roy Jones Jr., if these guys come in at the cruiserweight limit. Maybe they won't be heavyweight. Maybe, we don't know. But it wouldn't surprise me if this fight happens at a cruiserweight limit. Now, Roy Jones Jr., of course, you could argue that he boxed way too long, and I think for a lot of people it did. And for a lot of people, they will, especially newer boxing fans, will look at Roy Jones Jr. and go, well, he weren't that good. But that's because they didn't see him in his prime, in his peak. They didn't see that. They see him getting badly knocked out by Enzo Maccarinelli and things like that. They see him get absolutely schooled by a Joe Calzaghe, for example. I mean, of course, he had some great fights with Antonio Tarver. He gets stopped by one, lost on points to another. Roy Jones Jr., he's been around, and let's be honest, his losses were always against top-level opposition. I mean, you could probably argue with, say, a Danny Green, for example. That wasn't really a top opposition, but maybe at the time, who knows? But, I mean, he does have wins over, say, Jeff Lacey and Felix Trinidad, and the list goes on. But the losses that he has had, I mean, Even though he retired in 2018, his last loss was in 2015 when he got badly knocked out by Enzo Macronelli. Again, Macronelli, that wasn't him in his prime either. But before then, it was 2011 when he lost to Denis Lebedev, cruiserweight number one for a lot of people with Lebedev. So there was nothing wrong with losing to him. And again, that was in the final round as well. Losing to a Bernard Hopkins again. Now, one of the most important things in this one is the age and the amount of time out of the ring, as in inactivity. Mike Tyson, he's been out of the ring for a hell of a long time. And he's, 54, 55 years old. Roy Jones Jr. is 50, 51 years old. But I think Roy Jones Jr. is a young 51-year-old. Even though that he retired in 2018, he's still been in the gym. He's still been doing all the work. He's still been out on the road. He's still been doing the pads. He's still been keeping in shape. And that's going to be a key factor. Now, Mike Tyson, he can look great on the heavy bag, on the mitts. He can look great for a 15, 20-second spurt. Most people can. If you can just go hell for leather and get your coordination for 15, 20 seconds, record that, upload it, it's going to look fantastic. But can he do that for each round? Can he go 8 rounds with anybody, let alone Roy Jones Jr.? Can he go 8 rounds? Are they 3-minute rounds? I don't know. Maybe they're going to be 2-minute rounds. Again, these are the kind of things that we have to wait official confirmation of. Or maybe the official confirmation has already been out there, what the weight limit will be, what the rounds are, the headgear, yes, headgear, no, what size gloves. Maybe it's already been out there and I've totally missed it. If I have, I do apologise. But for me, I think that it's the lifestyle as well. Mike Tyson hasn't been living the lifestyle. We know Mike Tyson ballooned up to, 270 pounds at one point, just due to slobbing around, basically, eating whatever he wants to eat, not really working out. In fact, he says that he hasn't put on a pair of boxing gloves in many, many years. So until recently, he hasn't even been hitting the bags. He hasn't been doing that. But now, of course, he's been in the gym, especially during lockdown, and he's been looking really good. He's got his physique back, and he's looking really, really good, especially for his age, that's for sure. But Roy Jones Jr., in my opinion, he can just tire Mike Tyson down. If he really wants to, he can just stay on the outside, don't engage with him, and tire him down. And after about 2 or 3 rounds, I fully expect Mike Tyson to start breathing through his ass. To be honest with you, I really do. It doesn't matter what kind of condition he's in. Even if he's doing all the work in the gym and he's looking good, even in some kind of sparring, he could be looking really good. But on fight night, when the adrenaline kicks in, the expectation kicks in, this is Iron Mike Tyson. Is he as good now as what he once was? All of that will start weighing heavy on him. And a lot of fighters, they find that they gas very, very quickly on fight night due to the expectation, due to the atmosphere. Look at Anthony Yard. Anthony Yard has got a very good engine on him. But against Kovalev, he was gassing after 2 rounds. That's because of the occasion, the adrenaline. So I think Mike Tyson is going to have all of that as well. Roy Jones Jr., for me, is the favourite in this fight. For a lot of people, maybe not, because a lot of people will see Roy Jones Jr., that bad knockout against Enzo Macronelli, and things like that. And that's what people will be thinking, that if Mike Tyson hits Roy Jones, then Roy Jones is going to go to sleep. And you could be absolutely correct if Mike Tyson hits him. And that's a big if. Because Roy Jones Jr., again, he's been training quite hard with Chris Eubank Jr. for the last few months as well. So his footwork is going to be there. His timing may not be what it once was, but it's still going to be much sharper than Mike Tyson. So for me, I think the first 2 or 3 rounds, Roy Jones Jr., he's not going to go in there looking to knock out Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson is going to go in there looking to knock out Roy Jones Jr. if both of these guys are taking it serious. We've seen Mike Tyson with Corey Sanders when they had that exhibition, when he was like holding up Corey Sanders, when he was like hitting him and Corey Sanders would like wobble, and then Mike Tyson would like hold him to stop him from hitting the floor. It was a fun exhibition. If this is going to be a fun exhibition, then Roy Jones Jr. I can see carrying Mike Tyson throughout this one. But for me, I think Roy Jones Jr., due to his engine, due to his technique, his speed, is going to be too much for Mike Tyson. Honestly, I can see it being too much. And even if this is going to be a one-sided victory and it does manage to go to 8 rounds, I can see the judges giving this fight a draw to not disrespect one or the other. Because, let's be honest, in the boxing ring, both of these guys are legends. For sure, if you guys want to talk about Hall of Famers, these are the kind of guys that you would talk about as Hall of Famers. But on fight night, I don't think Mike Tyson is going to be able to land on Roy Jones Jr. Honestly, I really don't. So anyway, that's my prediction. I mean, who wins? It's not really that important to me as to who wins. I'm not emotionally invested as to which one I would prefer to win. Not at all. For me, both of these guys are absolute gods of the boxing ring. But for me, I think that when you weigh everything up, Roy Jones Jr. either on points or a mid to late round stoppage. That's my honest feeling on this one. I think Mike Tyson will come out the blocks, going for it, and Roy Jones Jr. will be fully aware of that one. He'd quite happily give up the first couple of rounds, just moving around, and then eventually he'll start to put his foot on the gas and get Mike Tyson out of there, if he really wants to. For me, I think that Roy Jones Jr., it's his fight to win or lose. How this fight goes is entirely up to Roy Jones Jr. Honestly, that's how I honestly feel. I know people would love to see a Mike Tyson knockout, but again, what happens with the winner? If the winner looks really good, if the winner knocks out, say if Roy Jones knocks out Mike Tyson, or Mike Tyson knocks out Roy Jones Jr. and looks good doing it, what about the ego of the winner? Are they going to start thinking, you know what, one more run in the professional game? Both of these guys have egos the size of the planet. Anyway, drop your thoughts below, click thumbs up, subscribe, catch you all on the next video.